Welcome back to the Alec Lewis Show. I am your host, Alec Lewis. This is episode 42. Recording this on Wednesday. We're late in the week. Usually do this Monday or Tuesday, but if you guys don't know, the Vikings played Monday night against the Bears. They won 30-12 in what was kind of a weird game, at least in my opinion. The Vikings kind of controlled the thing. It wasn't absolutely perfect. I wasn't really sure what I was seeing from the Bears throughout the entire night. Like, they scored a touchdown. Then the offensive lineman Kramer, who they handed the ball off earlier in the season and fumbled, he didn't report, so that was called back. Anyways, it was nuts. Thank you guys for being here. If you don't know me, I write about the Vikings for theathletic.com and The Athletic, which is a website that I'm grateful to write for. And last week, if you missed it, did a bunch of stories earlier this week. I had something on Cam Bynum and his celebrations and kind of what that means. And then, like I said, I'm recording this Wednesday, but I'll have something Thursday that I think you guys will enjoy. So go check that out over on the website. This show, which I do twice a week, and I'm going to have another one later in the week, either Thursday afternoon or Friday with a guest. This show I do a couple times a week. Really enjoy doing it. This is the first year. This is episode 42. We've had a great time. Have toyed around with a lot of different strategies, ideas, approaches to the show. And I've had like I said, I've had a blast doing it. Appreciate you guys listening, whether it's on YouTube and you're a subscriber. If you're not, you can hit that button below. If you're on Apple, Spotify, you can hit the follow buttons over there and rate and review us, and that stuff helps us out. But I appreciate that. The show is presented by First Resource Bank. It's a member FDIC bank. Very close with a few guys over there. Tim Siegley, Aaron Siegley, Charlie Anderson. Really, really good people in charge of running that operation. And you guys, if you're looking for a local bank with people who are Vikings fans and really great to work with, I really, really recommend you go check them out. The link for their bank and First Resource is down below, so any information you need, go check that out. We're gonna hop right into this. I usually early in the week do kind of a 5 thoughts type of idea where I just give you 5 things on the top of my mind that I've been thinking about or that I have ascertained by way of watching film or talking to people. And today, instead of doing that, I just asked for some questions on Twitter or X or whatever the heck we're calling it these days. Had about 20 people reply with questions. So I'm just going to tick those off, go in a random order, absolute randomness in terms of where I'll start and where I'll end. I did not plan this out. I don't have written answers, but I'm excited to get to these questions. So we will hop right into it, and will allow me to get some of the thoughts that I have off my chest. I'm looking forward to doing that. We'll start here. Coach Simons at Coach Simons DL. Could we see another free agent pickup before the playoffs start? It seems like everyone we've picked up, we tend to hit on recently. Is there anyone left? What I would say, Coach Simon, so I believe is a local defensive line coach, so always fun to have people who are in the game listening. It's hard to fathom any free agent pickup at this point that is a meaningful player as opposed to just depth. Like you saw a couple weeks ago, the Vikings added longtime cornerback Kelvin Joseph for depth in the event of Stephon Gilmore, because of Stephon Gilmore's hamstring injury and just wanting to add depth at that spot. He made sense. He's also a guy who can play the gunner role. So like that type of player to me would be in play. But like I've seen across, like in the transaction reports, you see like an Odell Beckham. It's hard for me to imagine you would inject this locker room, which has had such phenomenal chemistry of late and really all year going back to the summer and spring, with a player like that who would, take some specific role away from certain players. Like even at the receiver position, just to use an example, like the 3 guys who start at the spot it's very obvious: Justin Jefferson, Jordan Addison, Jalen Naylor. But behind those 3 guys are a Trent Sherfield and a Brandon Powell who put in a lot of work and a lot of dirty work on a weekly basis. And so to expect those guys to all of a sudden sit, I think that would be a little faulty. And then I think just to even inject the locker room with the player who would force those guys to sit would make them feel a certain way, considering the amount of work they put in. And I know this is a business, But like I said, I think part of this success this year has been how well this locker room really does gel. I've said this before, but it always feels like great basketball teams, like the Timberwolves at the beginning of this year. It felt like their chemistry was a little bit off. You remove Karl Anthony Towns, you remove some of just the continuity of that locker room. You inject it with Dante DiVincenzo, you inject it with the Julius Randle. It takes time for some of that stuff to gel, and you're starting to see kind of the benefits of that chemistry play out over there on the basketball court. And I just think, even though a lot of these defensive players that they added are new, and even though the Vikings have proved time and time again, to your point, Coach Simons, as you guys know, listening to this, like, they've proven they can bring guys in, and on a whim, those guys can gel. We've seen it with Jonathan Grenard and his leadership ability. We've seen it with Andrew Van Ginkel. I just have a hard time at this point seeing something notable other than a depth piece. And maybe in the event of injury, who knows what would happen, but that's kind of where I'm at with that. Great question, though. I appreciate it. Jaquitas asks, any rumors about contract extension for players like Cam Bynum, Byron Murphy, Shaq Griffin, etc.? What I will tell you, just from talking to people internally, is I think there have been conversations internally about what extensions make sense moving forward. Now, in terms of specifics, whether it is for Byron Murphy or whether it is for Cam Bynum, I can't go down that road at this position. I can report what I know, and it's that Cam Bynum and the Vikings talked well into kind of right before the start of the season on an extension. It did not happen. His agency also represents Byron Murphy, so those guys are both represented by Clutch. And so how the Vikings and their two agents are different, but they're very close. So how the Vikings navigate those situations, to me, are going to be interesting. And it probably comes down to, I mean, honestly, like what are these guys like a Cam Bynum or like a Byron Murphy Jr. asking for from a monetary perspective? And then where do the Vikings see that in relation to what might be available both on the free agent market and in the draft? And like, I look to free agency, and there are probably going to be some intriguing guys, like at safety specifically. One of those guys is Javon Holland, who Brian Flores has a relationship with from his time in Miami, and who is a very versatile player and a younger player. Not that Cam Bynum is not young. He is. I believe he's only 25 or 26. So, I mean, Byron Murphy, similarly, he's young, but in free agency, you're going to have a DJ Reed, a Charvarius Ward, and his Byron Murphy's value is probably going to be pretty high, considering he has, I believe, 6 interceptions. So how the Vikings navigate that stuff is going to be pretty interesting. But I do know, and where I started the answer to this question, that it is a priority for this Vikings staff to reward the guys who are not only came up through the pipeline here, but also that this front office brought in and that have performed. Like they value the continuity. They value the players that these guys are and what they've done for this team and for this organization. So I wouldn't rule any of that stuff out. It's ultimately, like, I know this is not groundbreaking. You guys are like, we know, Alec, you're supposed to tell us what's going to happen. But I really don't think until the market declares and these guys' value is really out in the open, it's easy to predict that stuff. But I will, like, what I will say is conversations about extensions, I think, have happened internally in terms of where to take this thing moving forward from a roster perspective. But again, another good question. Daires Al-Lad, which I don't know if that's I don't know if that's French. I don't know what that is, and I'm going to sound dumb because it's probably obvious, and I just don't know because I'm so invested into freaking football right now. In the case B-Flow gets a head coaching job, what 2 to 3 coaches would you like to see get a shot at being KOC's DC next year? This is an interesting question because I think it allows me to talk about part of the reason why I think this defensive staff and this defense have been so successful, and why I think all the signings that they made in free agency are successful. It takes time for a defensive coordinator and a defensive system and what that system values. It takes time for a front office to learn that, for a front office from a front office to see how that plays out, and then for them to then target players who fit that mold. And that is both in free agency and in the draft. And so One of the aspects of losing Brian Flores that would concern me is just they're beyond the play calling ability on Sunday and beyond the crazy scheme to then shift from a coordinator who has a very specific type to a totally different type. To me, that takes an adjustment period, not just for the players internally in the locker room, not just for the other coaches that potentially stick around, but it also takes a learning period and an adaptation period for the scouting department, for the front office to know what that coach values, to know why that coach values what they do. So to go back to your question, it brings up, it's an interesting one. It's like there are multiple paths you could take if Brian Flores is rewarded for the job he's done with the head coaching job. Do you elevate someone internally like a Durante Jones or like a Mike Saravo, who have not coordinated at the NFL level before? Durante was a defensive coordinator at LSU, but do you elevate that type of person who would likely run a similar system and would likely value a similar type of player, body type, play style, acumen of the player? Or do you go outside and do you find an experienced person who has done this before, who can kind of just take control of that unit and the vision for that unit the way that Brian Flores has? And I don't know if that would end up being a Robert Saleh type person. I don't know if people will bristle at this name, but Brandon Staley has done it before. He's been successful. He's close with Kevin O'Connell. Like, that would be a name. There are other different types of guys across the league that would be very intriguing. I mean, what the Cardinals and some of their staff and what they've done, that's interesting. The college ranks would probably have some guys that would intrigue Kevin O'Connell. But to me, it's like those are the different types of paths you could take. The continuity, elevation, kind of rewarding of the people that have been here and put in the work in this building, or going to find the guy who has his entire defensive vision and has done it in the past. Like that's a pretty interesting conversation. The other facet to that conversation would be, in the event that Brian Flores were to get a head coaching job, who would he want to bring over on his defensive staff? So would he want to take a Durante Jones to be his DC? Would he want to take a Mike Saravo to be his DC, or other guys? Would he, he's very close with Patrick Graham, who is the DC in Vegas. Who knows what happened in Vegas? Maybe Patrick Graham were to become his DC, and then, Durante Jones and Mike Saravo becomes an interesting conversation. So what I would say also is the Vikings have done a good job building their staff from a depth perspective behind those guys that I mentioned, behind the Durante and the Saravo. Like Dad Bogardus, the assistant linebackers coach, is very highly thought of inside the building. Very sharp guy, was in LA with a lot of these guys. I mentioned the Cardinals defense. There's a coach over there, Sam Seifkis. I know the Vikings really liked him. I think at some point the vision was that he would elevate kind of on this staff. So there's a lot of potential avenues that could go. It would be fascinating to see how it's sorted out. And honestly, it would be tough, because I really do feel like this past offseason was the gelling of, okay, this is what Brian Flores is going to do. This is what he wants for him to operate as best as he possibly can. And this is a good way for us to identify talent, players that fit that mold. Like you saw it within the draft. I mean, a Levi Drake Rodriguez is an interior defensive tackle who can move. A Kyrie Jackson was a lengthy corner who was fast and who could run, and that was the type of style. Like even a Mekhi Blackman, physical, in your face cornerback with ball skills. The undrafted players that they've hit on, they've been perfectly tailor made to what Brian Flores wants to do. So I guess the point overarching that I'd make is, I think there are a lot of avenues. It's hard to know which way they would go. There are internal options, and the two guys that I mentioned, I think specifically, they jump out to me. But it would be tough, and I think it would force. I mean, it would be a good data point of like how quickly can they adapt, and this is what this is what happens for good teams. Like other teams come calling because they are intrigued by what they're doing on the offensive side of the ball. we'll see in terms of whether Wes Phillips gets more interviews, Keenan McCardell, Josh McCown. I mean, when you win like this and when you do it at the level that this Viking staff have done it, that's a testament to the job you're doing. And as you see with the best staffs that have ever done it, the Nick Sabans of the world, it becomes a really big skill set for the head coach and Kevin O'Connell, in this case, to be able to replenish and revamp and reshape. And I think that's part of the job. And I have faith that Kevin O'Connell will be able to do that in a very optimal way. And so, it's a great question. It'd be interesting to see how it plays out. Looper Gaming, who reads and listens, and I always appreciate it. Do you think Ollie Gordon would be a fit for the Vikings? I have to be very honest. Ollie Gordon, I know, is a running back at Oklahoma State. I know that because I freaking love college football and I'm all in all the time. I know he had an off the field thing before the season. I can't really tell you what he's done this year, but I'm going to look while I pontificate about this being an option. I do think the running back position is a spot that they will prioritize in the draft. There's no question about it. Ollie Gordon this year only had 880 yards on 4.6 yards per carry, 13 touchdowns. His size is something that I would be curious about just with the fit with this team, and I can get you that as well, and you guys as listeners that as well. Ollie Gordon is 6'2". He's more of a physical thumper type guy, which could fit definitely. But I guess to the initial point, I do think running back is going to be a priority, whether it is in the third round comp pick, whether it's in the fifth round, whether they trade back and they can get like a Caleb Johnson or a Marion Hampton pretty early. Who knows? But that's one of the positions I think for sure that once this season ends, wherever it ends, and I take a breather and I go to Bora Bora and I turn my brain off for two weeks and hibernate in this winter weather. Once that all ends and we're talking about the draft, I think you'll see that position popped up in a lot of my mock drafts. That's for sure. Steven Turner. He also reads and listens, and I always appreciate that. Exactly what round of the playoffs will the Vikings suffer that devastating defeat? I'm not about this. Like I from the time that I moved here, I'll never forget. I'll tell this story on there. I don't really care. A few weeks in, I'm writing every week. It was the second week actually. So I got here in August of 2022. For those who don't know, I got to Minnesota covering the Vikings for The Athletic. Grateful as heck to have the job, to be working alongside John Krasinski and Michael Russo and Aaron Gleeman and Dan Hayes and Zach Pierce, an editor we have here. Like, it's just such a freaking good group that I'm grateful. And I'm pumped about this year. It's going to be interesting. New regime, young executive, young head coach. I'm fascinated. I'm raring to go. And they beat the Packers in week 1, Kevin O'Connell's first game. You guys remember that. I mean, it was a pretty impressive win. Zadarius Smith sacking Aaron Rodgers and crawling on the field. I'm like, what is going on? This environment is absurd. I was seeing the snowfall in September inside a stadium. Couldn't understand what was going on, but it was electric. And then week 2, the Vikings go to Philadelphia. You guys remember this game. I believe Cam Dantzler got torched over the top by Quez Watkins. It was Ed Donatel was the defensive coordinator at the time. Obviously, the cornerbacks were giving up 10 yards of room at the snap, playing it off coverage. Troy Aikman was ripping them for it. And I wrote after the game about the loss, and I remember the comment section after was just incendiary. I mean, people were hot. What are we doing? What is the defense? This team's never going to get over hump. This team's never going to win a Super Bowl, blah, 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 blah. I remember my mom down in Birmingham, Alabama, who is not, she likes sports. She knows this. She'll be listening, but she's not avid besides pickleball. And she calls me and she's like, what are these people so mad about? And I'm not to impersonate my mom like that, but I'm like, Mom, I didn't really know either, but these people really, really badly want a Super Bowl, and they have been beaten down so hard. And from that point on, in some way, I get it. Like, that's the first aspect of what I would say to Steven saying, when is the devastating loss going to happen, is I get it. You've been through the absolute ringer supporting this team. But I at least this is the tack that I'm going to take, is I'm not perpetuating this woe is me, we're never going to do it, when's the shoe going to drop? That's not me. I'm positive, I'm optimistic, and I know like the layers to which this staff is going to go to give themselves the best chance. Now, I've also been very realistic on this podcast and in my writing about the reality of the constraints of this season. The Vikings took on $70 million, in dead cap money. And when you do that, and you have not drafted like the Detroit Lions have, it is very hard to have the appropriate amount of talent to get this thing over the hump. That's what I'll say. So to expect to respond to your question thinking the devastating loss is never going to come. No, like I think without question, it is going to be really freaking hard to beat the Eagles. I mean, that front is going to be very menacing. And you guys will remember Brian Flores against the Eagles last year. They ran it all over Brian Flores' team at that night. And I remember the Vikings were trying some different stuff, but I sat with Brian Flores late last season. I remember that game had still just stuck in their craw about how tough it was. So I guess the point I want to make is you're not going to hear me on this podcast or in my writing until I get really jaded talk about just this not like the shoe's going to drop at some point. Like I wrote earlier this week for Wednesday. I mean, you look at some of the key metrics of this team, and there are concerning ones. The defense gives up explosive passing against good quarterbacks. Like I said, the front on the defensive line and the offensive line, they give me some concern. The turnovers, that gives me some concerns. But in general, a lot of what this team does stacks up with the best and stacks up numerically and statistically with teams that have won Super Bowls in the last 10 years. And that to me is relevant. And when I know that this staff is as able to make adjustments on the fly as they are, it gives me an interesting, it just gives me an optimism that, again, is not to say that I think they're going to make it to the conference championship or whatever, but you're just not going to hear me be woe is me about it. And that's, I mean, Steven, I get it. Like I said, I trust me, I understand. But it's just important for me to say that. And I just like getting that off my chest. I got to be honest. And sorry, Mom, for shredding you, but love you. 3 questions for you from Steven. What is the name of the song at the beginning of the show? I don't know the answer to that. I downloaded it from like a website that allowed me to get it was music that didn't have a copyright deal. And I liked it. I thought it kind of got me in the mood, got you revved up a little bit. Paul Allen said on the radio last week that he thought it was really sad. It made him sad. I think that's just him. I like the song, but I'd be curious. Steven also, he asked 2 other questions. How long did it take you to write that story on Cam Bynum? What's the backstory on how that came to be? Love that question. Like, as you guys who know me, listen to this, know the writing and the process of it is my passion. It's what I love to do. It's what I love to study. It's why I read. It's why it's funny, like, and this is getting more to me than probably you guys want to know, but I didn't get into this originally for the writing. Got into it because I just freaking love sports and I want to be around them for the rest of my life. And then I went to Missouri for journalism school, and you realize that the craft of this thing, that's what ultimately became the passion. And a lot of these games run together, but the stories about people and what they have to overcome and how they relate to just the world around us, like that's what I really, really, really love to do. And that Cam Bynum story was exactly that. How long did it take to write the story? I wrote the story in a span of maybe I spent about 4 or 5 hours on last Thursday night, and then I finished maybe 3 hours on Thursday morning. So maybe like 8 hours total of writing, but I also transcribe every interview I do. And you guys might be like, Alec, you're a nerd. What is transcribing? That is, I listen back to every interview that I do and I type out the entire interview. For some reason that triggers in my brain. It's a lot of extra work. There are AI products that would make it a lot easier for me, but I love the process of that because I'm a nerd. So yeah, that's how long it took to write it. The reporting definitely, I mean, I talked to his parents for an hour. I talked to his trainer for an hour. I sat down with Cam, and this is like, I'll say this on the podcast because, it's not something that made sense to do in the story, but like to show you who Cam Bynum is. So we had agreed last Wednesday that he and I would sit down after practice, but he had a meeting after practice. So he went to the meeting and after practice, and the meeting ran long. And by the time the meeting ended, we were already out of the locker room. So I couldn't like linger up in the locker room or in the Vikings facility. So I went down to the media room. And I knew that Cam, he does his own private workout after practice every single day, where he takes his cleats, he walks them over to the indoor. He's got these 4 cones that he sets on the ground, and he works with those things like every single day after practice, doing the drills that he's done since he was a young kid. And if you want more, a lot of this is in the story, but like you'll often see him after practice with Brian Asamoah, who has noticed Cam Bynum's tackling and wants to be as good as Cam has been at tackling. So he'll now work with him. Last year it was Andrew Booth. Cam essentially like took Andrew under his wing, and obviously it didn't work out for him. But I think like if you were to talk to Andrew and the impact Cam had on him and trying to make him as good as he could be, like he would rave about just Cam's intent and willingness to spend that extra time. So anyway, I knew that Cam was going to have to, or was going to want to do that extra work after the meeting. But he calls me after the meeting and he's like, "I'm so sorry, it ran late. Would still love to talk." And I told him I was about to leave, but if he could meet me. So he came down and sat before even doing his extra workout and spent an hour and 15 minutes with me just going through his entire backstory, and did not have to do that. The day before he had an entire Filipino like event for charity. He was the NFLPA Player of the Week. Like you have the types of guys like this in your building, and it's going to be hard for the tide not to rise. And that's just what I would say. But the story came about originally, funny enough, like weeks ago. I was like, I've talked to Cam for years in the locker room about defense, about a lot of different things. And so I reached out to Justin Wilcox, the head coach at Cal. And this is a crazy backstory. I'm slithering around everywhere, but I hope you're enjoying it. And I reached out to Justin and we talked for 15 minutes. And then I told Cam, I talked to Justin Wilcox, and he's like, "What? Like, tell me about it." That's just the type of guy Cam is. And then he said, if you really want to do something, like I don't know if you know, but like I was a 5th string on JV. And I was like, "Really? I didn't really know that. I kind of imagine you're a sharp guy. You've always kind of excelled." And he's like, "No, dude." And then he's like, he said, "I want you to talk to Anthony Brown, who's his longtime trainer, who really Cam attributes to so much of his success." So I ended up getting on the phone with Anthony, and Anthony Brown, his trainer, and I talked for an hour. And I got off the phone. I talked to Anthony probably at like an 8 p.m. on a Tuesday night. Got home for the facility I was pretty exhausted. And but that conversation was one of the best I've had all year. And I knew at that point there was a way to get into Cam's story that could be impactful, and that would shed a lot of light on who this guy is. So love those questions. I appreciate it. The last one from Steven. Do you think Harrison Smith wants to play another year? I wouldn't be shocked if he does, what I tell you. It might depend on, like, if Brian Flores is still here, that might intrigue him. It might depend on how far they make it. There's probably a lot of things going on. But I know Harrison loves this locker room. I know he loves playing for Brian Flores. He loves Kevin O'Connell. They drink coffee every Friday morning together, and to be a fly on the wall for those football conversations would probably be as good as you could get across this league. So wouldn't be surprised if he wanted to play another year. That's what I'd say. I'm going to take a break for a sip of water. Then we'll come back, and I will get to more of you guys' questions. All right, welcome back to the show. If you made it this far, please hit that subscribe button on YouTube. If you're listening on audio, please follow or rate, review, whatever the heck we do over there. Just rolling with these questions, and it's they're really good, and I hope you guys are enjoying it as much as I am. Eric Hansen asks, "How cautious with injuries do you expect Minnesota to be while the number 1 seed is still in reach?" What I would say is they're not going to be overly cautious here. Like with Ivan Pace Jr. and Stephon Gilmore are probably the 2 guys you're talking about. As we talk, and this is December 18th on Wednesday, I have not seen the injury report from Wednesday. I expect Stephon Gilmore to be limited, and I would expect him to play this weekend. So in terms of being cautious, that's what I'd say there. With Ivan Pace Jr., he'll be eligible to return from the IR next week. And I think it's similar. Like if he is ready to rock, To me, I don't think they're going to hold him out, especially that next week would be the Packers game with a downhill running game. And guess who you would like to have for a downhill running game? Ivan Pace Jr. So I mean, the idea that this team could win out and secure home field, to me, the value of that is probably overwhelming. I would also say that, like, I feel like the cornerbacks have done a pretty good job without Stephon Gilmore. So, it'll be interesting to see how integrating him back looks and just how healthy he looks. But that's what I'd say. I just don't think you're going to get an overly cautious team right now. But I mean, you guys, I've said this throughout TJ Hawkinson's rehab. Like, people were freaking out about that. But it's like this athletic training staff, they are very sharp. Everything is backed by data. They try not to overwork guys. And I feel like for the most part this year, other than guys getting rolled up on, they've limited the soft tissue stuff pretty well. I mean, they've done a good job, and I think they deserve credit amid this year too. Like the Tyler Williams of the world, the Dan Ridnours, the Josh Inks, like those. Like it's how much of injury luck is random. I don't really know, but I don't think you can mitigate the importance of availability for a lot of the key players on this team, like Blake Cashman, to come back from the turf toe, for them to do it the way they did, for him to look the way he has. Aaron Jones has been banged up. He's played through it. Not only played through it, but he looked on Monday night, I thought, as good as he's looked all year. So, I wouldn't be shocked if Gilmore's back Sunday. Wouldn't be shocked if Ivan Pace is back next Sunday. Mac at Suits Bears. First, thank you for the comment on the show. I appreciate that, Mac. It sounds unlikely that the Vikings stick with Darnold long term, but I'm curious, what do you think of J.J. McCarthy's trade value, especially since this upcoming draft is projected to be down one for quarterbacks? I mean, to me, it's not like worth talking about J.J. McCarthy's trade value. I guess I'll just answer the question. First of all, like, I think his trade value would definitely be immense. Specifically to your point, it's an astute point. This draft class of quarterbacks, like, I'm interested by Cam Ward and Shedeur Sanders specifically, but there is not the conviction on these guys that you had on at least four of the guys last year, probably including JJ McCarthy, and probably even including a Michael Penix. So, and maybe Bo Nix too. So, the value would be there, but I just think the idea of having a quarterback that they identified, that they believe in, and on a rookie contract that would allow them to be very optimal in terms of roster building, like, I don't think that they moved off of that. If anything with Sam Darnold, like, we'll just see. But I think to mention the market for who's going to be available from a quarterback perspective, it's probably going to be like a Russell Wilson in free agency, Sam Darnold, potentially Kirk Cousins. I mean, Darnold is probably going to be like for his youth, for his mobility, for his potential ascent. I think he will probably be the most valuable, and whether that commands $45 million or whatever it commands, it's going to be interesting how the Vikings try to maximize the fact that they could franchise him. Would that allow them to trade him for like a second or first round pick? I don't know all of those things, but it's going to be interesting. Mac also asked, what's your favorite brunch in the Twin Cities? I haven't done a ton of brunch, to be honest. I've had Astor Cafe, which is very close to where I live, and it's an interesting spot. I like it in the summer outside. I think it's pretty good. I don't do a ton of brunch. I need to probably do more brunch. Like, I guess I've been to like a Good Day Cafe. I've been to some other spots, but if you've got ideas, I'm all ears. I haven't done a ton of brunch. I don't like these 12 o'clock Sundays during the season. I'm not eating brunch. On Saturdays, that's usually my off day. I'm sleeping in, and then I'm watching game day and watching college football. That's my life. That's what I do. Not a lot of brunch, but I probably need some spots. Like, you need that elbow jumper on the court to go to when you need a bucket. That's the same for brunch. Not at all, but it made sense in my head. Let's see what else we have here. Twins Rally Squirrel reads, listens all the time. Always appreciate that. Teams seem to be having more success running the ball against us lately. Why? It's a great point, in the last 3 games across the NFL, the Vikings have the lowest success rate against the run in the NFL, after being the best run defense and highest success rate in the NFL for the time before that. So it's definitely dipped. And I think it's a couple facets, probably, maybe a few. One, Ivan Pace's absence, to me, that's definitely part of it. While I think sometimes Ivan Pace misplays like his gap responsibility, he is so good at anticipating angles and kind of figuring out his way toward the running back and being able to kind of dip underneath offensive linemen, that to me, he covers up for sometimes when he's out of his gap and can often lead to negative runs, which I think really helps the success that they've had on the ground. Because if you get a team in 2nd and 12, they're probably not running again. They're probably going to try to pick up 6 and then be 3rd and 6. So I think not having Ivan Pace is probably where I'd start there. I think the other facets that I think are important down the stretch to think about here, one of them is, I mean, these guys have played a lot of snaps now. Like, I know Harrison Phillips has not played as many as he did last year. I know they've shuffled in Jalen Redmond, Jerry Tillery, Jihad Ward. I mean, they've mixed and matched, but these guys have played a lot of snaps. They've played a lot of, I mean, there was a lot during the early part of the season where those guys shouldered the team, to be honest, in terms of just the defense and how successful it was. So that's something I'm monitoring. And then I'll tell you, I mean, and I said this with Ben Lieber last week, like I talked to Harrison Phillips about what the Falcons did, and it was a lot of very smart targeting him in the run blocking unit. I felt like talking to Harrison Phillips that game against the Falcons gave them some answers. I thought Chicago had a couple successful runs to the outside, specifically with DJ Moore and even DeAndre Swift. So it's something I'm watching, that's for sure. It's questions that I'll be having off to the side in the locker room because I'm interested. But it's something that, like, for this defense to be as good as it's been at times throughout the course of this year, they're going to need to shore that up as best as possible. Sam Olson, another longtime reader and follower, which I appreciate. What is this team's potential kryptonite or issue you see that could cost them in the playoffs when they play some of the NFC top teams? Pretty easy answer for me. The interior of the offensive line against good interior defensive lines. So, I mean, like, let's just give you some examples. The Commanders, Daron Payne, Jonathan Allen. I remember in 2022 when the Vikings played in Washington, Kirk got absolutely obliterated in that game. They won. I remember the ref collided with Cam Bynum in that game. That was crazy. But that interior front, I mean, that's a good front. The Rams, Kobe Turner, Braden Fisk. Those guys are tough. The Eagles, Jalen Carter, whoever else they have, Brandon Graham. I mean, they've got Milton Williams. They have dudes, and those guys, specifically Jalen Carter, can be game wreckers. I mean, like the Falcons, a pretty good matchup, but even they got pressure. The Bears, not phenomenal. They seem to get some pressure last week on Sam Darnold. Like you run down the list. I mean, if I get like the Packers, Kenny Clark, he's always kind of giving them some trouble. Devontae Wyatt I mean, he's a talented interior pass rusher. And then with Dalton Risner right guard, with Blake Brindell left guard, I mean, Garrett Bradbury at times at center. Like, there was a next gen stats, and maybe I can look this up while we are talking, but there was a next gen stats statistic that I saw last week that I never tweeted because I didn't want to bring. You just want to be smart with some of the stuff you're putting out. I'm logging in so I can see this, so I can read you guys the statistic because I think it's an important one. But it's about how many pressures this interior of the offensive line had given up compared to the league, and I'm almost on it, so stick with me. Here we go. Let's see here. This was from December 12th, so that's 6 days ago. The Vikings' interior offensive line have combined to allow 140 total pressures on 1,359 pass blocking snaps between them, resulting in a league-high pressure rate of 10.3%. And then there's this little note. No other combined interior offensive line unit is above 10%. So that's my concern. And I just, this offense is so reliant on vertical passing game. That's Justin Jefferson's skill set. That's Jordan Addison's skill set. And it should be relying on that. They're so good at identifying what teams are doing coverage-wise, and those receivers are so good. But that to me, that's a concern against some of the teams I mentioned. I'm going to get to a couple more here. Roger from Mexico City, which is freaking awesome. I've wanted to go to Mexico City, never been. I might do that this summer. How important has Josh McCown been for the success that Sam Darnold has had this year, and what are the odds he gets a head coaching opportunity after this season? Great question. So I don't think, and I this is in my story for Thursday, but I don't think you can minimize the role that he plays as just a confidant, as a just trustworthy voice to lean on, a supportive voice, an uplifting guy. Like Josh McCown is so positive, an experienced guy who, when he's telling you something, it's coming from a place of like, this guy has lived it. It's not just conjecture out of nowhere. Like I think it's been massive. I think it's been important. And I also think when you pair Josh McCown, who has that type of emotional awareness, emotional feel that he has, with a Grant Udinski, who's the assistant quarterbacks coach, definitely a riser in the profession, young guy who's very schematically inclined and oriented and has a feel for Kevin O'Connell's system and how Kevin thinks at a level that is very, very high level and very impressive. When you pair those skill sets in the same room, you have the best chance you can possibly have to bring out the best in a quarterback. And so I like, and again, to think that's not a testament to Kevin O'Connell for identifying that that's what the room needs to maximize the player. Like, I think that would be overlooking that as well. But that's what I'll say. As far as head coaching opportunities, that's probably too far right now, I would think. Do I think he could do it and swim and not sink? Yes. Do I think down the road he's going to be a head coach? Yes. Offensive coordinator probably makes more sense as a stepping stone. The question, and the question I would ask is is Josh ready for that? Like he's not called plays, designing plays, all that stuff. Like that would be a question, but I would have to think that after this season, there's going to be great intrigue in him just with you don't find guys who can have the command of the room, who are that positive, who have the experience that he has. Like it's a package that is going to be very sought after, I think, across the league, whether it's this offseason or in years to come. Darnold Stan, have you ever been ice fishing before, and would you try it? Never been. I probably would try it, but I got to be honest, that's the last place in the world I would ever expect myself to be, ice fishing. I mean, I don't have the clothes for it. I don't even know what that entails. Do you throw the line in the ice? Do you crack the ice? You guys are laughing at me just like Lino Lakes. I don't even know what ice fishing is. Like, the only ice fishing thing I know is like Club Penguin or something, which is crazy for me to even bring up. But that's what I'll say. Last one, and then I'll hop out of here. But I appreciate you guys being here. Very fun to answer these questions. Carl Johnson from Lake Elmo asks, you came from covering the Kansas City Royals to the Vikings beat in 2022, August 2022. What are some of the biggest differences you've noticed, good or bad, between covering an MLB team versus an NFL team? A great question. And it's a fun one to end on for sure. I'd say, the first thing that comes to mind is just the relevance. Like and that's not, it's no slight on the Royals. Like I loved that job. I loved getting to watch a lot of the guys who are now dominating at the MLB level, whether it's a Bobby Witt or a Vinny Pasquantino. Like I got to know those guys, the pitchers. I got to know them so well and really enjoyed every aspect of that. But I used to go days, weeks where I'm like, does anyone, frankly, it's like, does anyone care about this? And I really cared, so I could project that into the writing, and I did. If you go back and read, I was trying everything I could possibly try to make that stuff interesting. But the NFL, it's just what I would say is in baseball, it took so much to go a little ways, where in football, it takes so little to go a long ways in terms of nuggets or the writing or stories and that type of thing. So that's definitely a difference. The other aspect is the coaches and executives in football are different in capacities. One, they are less available. Like baseball, you would see the scouting staff, the front office, the coaches every day in the dugout, in the press box before games. I talk to those guys every day. I used to, Dayton Moore, the GM, like I used to talk to them all the time. And I'd say in football, those guys are less accessible. They're less open. And the other aspect of that is baseball is the culture of baseball is very much like, we want you to learn what's going on. I'd love to teach you what I'm seeing in the batter's box. In football, it's a little more like, these are state secrets. There's only so much I want you to know because there's competitive advantages to be gained by everything else. And so it takes more work. It takes different work. It takes different approaches. It's been awesome for me to get to be exposed to both. I would not be able to do this job the way I love to do it if I didn't spend the 3 years covering the Royals like I did. But no, it's been a blast, and I hope that gives you kind of a perspective. I've thought about it a lot, definitely over time. Talked to journalism students about it a lot, so appreciate the question, Carl. That's going to do it for episode 42 of the Alec Lewis Show. Appreciate all you guys who sent along questions. Hope I got to enough of them. Hope that was enjoyable for you guys. If you have not, please hit the subscribe button down below. Like or subscribe on Apple, Spotify, iHeart, wherever you're listening. Check out some of the writing over at The Athletic, theathletic.com. And we will be back later this week with a guest talking about this team and where things are headed. So appreciate you guys being here. Have a great rest of your week. We will talk to you soon. That is episode 42 of the Alec Lewis Show.